Caesar stepped off the bus into a cold spring morning in Columbus, Ohio, 12 years ago, at age 25, feeling the ache of failure after his small contracting business had folded in the last recession. He carried a battered tool bag and hope in his heart. He had answered an ad scrawled on a plywood board at a local lumberyard. Donnelly Construction, help wanted. When he arrived at the address, he found a rough dirt lot where a frame of a house stretched toward the gray sky. Frank Donnie, a broad-shouldered Irishman with a gray-streaked beard and hard, calloused hands, stood watching two men nailing boards. Frank's voice rumbled like distant thunder when he greeted Caesar. "You here for work?" Caesar swallowed his pride and nodded. "I sure am." Frank sized him up, then said, "We pay $15 an hour to start. You work hard, you'll go places." Caesar had no other offer, so he took it. The first weeks were hard. He woke at dawn, ate cold oatmeal, and drove to the site. He learned to carry lumber, speak in simple terms with the crew, and drink coffee that tasted like diesel. At night, he dreamed of a chance to prove himself. He woke each morning determined to swing his hammer with precision, hoping Frank would notice. Frank did notice. On the sixth morning, he called Caesar over and said, "You got good form," and tapped his chest. "We need a man like you." Caesar did not say much, but felt a spark of pride. Within 6 months, he led a small crew building a workshop addition. He learned to read blueprints, order supplies, and talk to clients who nodded at his calm voice and clear answers. In his small apartment, Caesar began copying every plan and cost sheet to a burned disk he labeled backup. He told himself it was just insurance against computer crashes, yet a small voice whispered that it might protect him someday. As months turned into a year, Frank started sending Caesar to meetings with architects and electricians. Caesar sat in tidy offices, taking notes, asking questions, absorbing every word. He carried his notebook like a treasure. When bidding season came, Frank let him prepare a bid for a renovation project. Caesar worked through late nights at his kitchen table, double-checking figures. When he handed the bid to Frank, the older man clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You've earned it." Caesar smiled, though he wanted to shout with joy. By the end of year 2, he managed entire projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He stayed late on Fridays, sacrificing weekends, because he believed that loyalty and sweat would secure his future. His wife, Lisa, worried about his health, but Caesar simply said, "This is my dream." He juggled site visits and invoicing, teaching himself digital project management on an old laptop. He introduced an online tracker so clients could watch progress in real time. Word spread, and Donnelly Construction began winning more work. At 3 years, Frank pulled him aside in the trailer office and said, "I want you to run things while I handle the big picture." He handed Caesar a key to an office drawer where he found a small stack of contracts and a ledger. Caesar felt a rush of pride and placed them in his own briefcase. He had become a partner in everything but name. Yet even then, as he accepted every praise, he slipped original copies of these documents into his hidden disk stash. He told himself it was just careful planning, but deep down he felt a growing unease when Frank mentioned his son Tommy's potential, as if Caesar's hard work might be replaced by a bloodline. He kept his promise to work hard, but he never forgot the burned disk waiting in his desk, a silent seed of hidden power for days he dared not imagine. Caesar's confidence grew with each passing year, and by his 4th spring in Columbus, Donnelly Construction was a different beast than the one he had joined so freshly scarred and hungry. What began as a 5-man crew had swelled to 30 employees, and Caesar found himself juggling more responsibilities than he had ever imagined when he first lifted a hammer for $15 an hour. He oversaw residential additions 1 month and commercial foundations the next, traveling from site to site in a worn pickup, laptop balanced on his knee, tracking budgets and deadlines with a relentless insistence on accuracy. Clients learned to expect his calm voice on the phone and his steady eye at their job sites. He introduced digital project management systems that sent progress reports by email and convinced architects to embrace sustainable materials that saved money and the environment. Late nights became his norm, returning home after dark, eating cold leftovers at his kitchen counter while Lisa quietly refilled his coffee and asked if he needed rest. He simply smiled and said, "Almost there," because every detail he perfected was a building block for his future. By the end of year 5, Frank trusted Caesar enough to let him bid on and win a $300,000 university renovation without his guidance. And Caesar pored over blueprints in the trailer office, measuring twice and cutting once, as his disk of hidden files grew thicker with copies of every contract and cost estimate. Each time he burned new backups, he told himself it was a precaution against data loss, but a part of him knew that hard work did not guarantee loyalty, and that he must hold something valuable in reserve. Around that time, Frank's son Tommy returned from college, diploma in hand, but little real understanding of the world Caesar had built. He arrived with talk of synergies and optimizing workflows, abruptly inserting himself into meetings and breezing past foremen who had spent years mastering their trades. Caesar watched Tommy's early missteps, promises of accelerated timelines that crumbled under inspection, and bit his tongue in favor of diplomacy, reminding himself that family ties mattered at the top. He continued to nurture client relationships, taking a developer named Adrian Voss out for long lunches, sketching out plans on napkins, and gently correcting Tommy's overambitious claims with calm facts. All the while, Caesar quietly expanded a network of loyal subcontractors and crew members. Miguel Santos, the foreman, Rebecca Chan, the project coordinator, and several journeymen who admired Caesar's integrity more than they liked Frank's partiality. He called them "my team" in hushed tones and shared his vision of a company built on merit, though he gave them no inkling of the disks sleeping in his locked drawer. In his own mind, he constructed a parallel path, gathering confidants who valued skill above bloodline, just in case the day came when loyalty alone would not protect them. The breakthrough came in year 6 when Caesar single-handedly landed the firm's biggest contract yet, a mixed-use development downtown worth $3 million. He spent weeks courting Voss, sending detailed proposals, driving through rain-slicked streets to the developer's sleek office towers, and answering every question with precise knowledge of zoning codes and construction sequences. When Voss shook his hand and said, "I'm investing in a partnership. Your reputation is why I'm betting on Donnelly," Caesar felt a surge of pride that eclipsed every late night and cold coffee. He celebrated with Lisa and called Miguel and Rebecca to a quiet dinner, but that same evening, he burned a fresh copy of all the new project files to his disk and sealed it in a manila envelope stamped "just in case," then stashed it in a safety deposit box downtown. It was a ritual he repeated every time he secured a major win, and with each insertion, his unease at Tommy's growing influence deepened. Frank began praising Tom more openly, bragging to clients that his son's MBA made Donnelly future-ready, and Caesar could see the old man's pride eclipse his gratitude for 12 years of Caesar's sweat. Still, Caesar pressed on. Mentoring apprentices, negotiating subcontracts, and streamlining workflows, believing his loyalty would eventually be rewarded with an equal share of trust. But in the hidden chambers of his mind, he knew that one day the man who had taken him under his wing might turn away, leaving Caesar to rely only on the foundation he had quietly built for himself. By the time Caesar stepped onto the site of the downtown mixed-use development that first morning, he had already spent months preparing every detail in his mind and on paper. He remembered the day he closed the deal with Adrian Voss, the developer who had looked him straight in the eye and declared, "I'm investing in a partnership. Your reputation is why I'm betting on Donnelly Construction." Caesar carried that promise like a talisman as he climbed into the back of the pickup and drove through Columbus's waking streets, his breath steaming in the cool air. On site, he surveyed the half-dug foundation trenches, the scent of damp earth rising beneath a pale sun. He greeted Miguel Santos, his foreman of 8 years, who nodded with relief to see Caesar in his hard hat rather than the untested Tommy, who had begun showing up with a clipboard full of impractical schemes. Caesar spent the morning walking every line, checking that the survey stakes matched the blueprints he had memorized, and confirming that the subcontracted excavation crew worked to the exact depth the plans required. Though he had delegated tasks, he personally handled every critical decision. He believed that no detail was too small to command his attention, especially on a project that would define Donnelly Construction's future, or so he once thought. That afternoon, he met with Adrian Voss and his team in a makeshift job site office, a trailer warmed by a space heater and crowded with stacks of documents. Voss looked pleased when Caesar laid out the timeline, budget, and risk mitigation strategies with a confident calm that only came from 11 years of experience. Meanwhile, Tommy hovered at the back of the room, chomping nervously on his pen, and when Caesar invited him to share his thoughts, Tommy launched into a pitch about accelerating the schedule by cutting corners on materials sourcing and subcontractor vetting. The proposal hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Voss raised an eyebrow and said, "I hired you for realistic planning, not pipe dreams." Caesar kept his expression neutral as Tommy reddened and slunk back, while Voss squeezed Caesar's shoulder and added, "Keep doing what you do best." That evening, after the site closed and the crews had gone home, Caesar returned to his apartment and sat at his kitchen table surrounded by open notebooks, blueprints, and the glow of his laptop screen. He copied every new contract, every updated risk assessment, and all communications with Voss onto his hidden disk, then locked it away in the safety deposit box. He told himself it was just prudent backup, yet a nagging thought whispered that he was preparing for a day when his careful record-keeping might be the only thing standing between him and betrayal. Over the next month, the site hummed with activity. Concrete trucks rolled in at dawn, steel beams rose into the sky by mid-morning, and by the time Caesar arrived each day, the skeleton of the building stretched upward like a promise of prosperity. He coordinated deliveries of glass panels and energy-efficient insulation, and he drove hard bargains with suppliers so that the project stayed on budget without compromising quality. Crew members began to joke that Caesar could build a skyscraper with blueprint and coffee alone. Clients driving past stopped to wave at him, trusting his calm competence more than the flashy MBA jargon Tom spouted. Caesar kept a friendly but professional distance from Tommy, who oscillated between swaggering confidence and brooding resentment. One rainy Wednesday afternoon, Caesar overheard Tommy on the phone outside the trailer, saying, "If we move to cheaper subcontractors, we'll save 15%. Why wouldn't we?" Caesar stepped out and calmly explained the long-term cost of replacing reliable artisans when corners were cut. Delays, shoddy workmanship, code violations. Tommy sneered, "You're stuck in the old ways, Danny. We need to think bigger." Caesar nodded politely and left him to his schemes. Inside the trailer, he made notes for the day's progress reports, and then he sent a detailed summary to Voss, who replied almost immediately. "Thanks, Caesar. You're the reason I trust this project to Donnelly." Caesar tucked that praise into his heart, but included it in that night's disk backup. Then came the first real crisis. An inspector arrived unannounced and flagged the foundation trenches, claiming that the reinforced steel placement did not meet the updated city code. Caesar had anticipated every potential snag except this. He raced to the inspector's side, presenting stamped drawings and emails showing that the city's code office had approved the steel plan 2 weeks earlier. The inspector consulted his paperwork, shrugged, and cleared the site with a curt apology. Caesar let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He called Miguel over and said, "We stay 2 steps ahead or we risk everything," reinforcing the lesson that competence and preparation beat luck every time. That night, he logged detailed notes of the encounter and stored them with his other records. Meanwhile, behind Caesar's back, Tom began inserting himself into client communications, emailing developers and architects directly, bypassing Caesar's coordinated channels. Caesar found out when Rebecca Chan, his project coordinator, came into his makeshift office, eyes wide. "Tommy's invited 2 architects to a lunch meeting on Wednesday, and he's promising a fast-track schedule." Caesar's jaw tightened. He replied quietly, "Let him go. I'll handle the fallout." And he did. He called the architects, explained the real constraints of scheduling and permitting, and reminded them that Caesar's realistic timelines had always protected their budgets from costly overruns. By the end of the call, the architects thanked Caesar for his honesty and asked that any future meetings include only the core project team. Caesar felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Everything he had built was anchored in trust, not hype. Yet the hidden disk in its safe deposit box weighed on him like a silent pact. Each backup, Each encryption, each carefully organized folder was a step toward his insurance policy against betrayal. He knew that one day Frank's favor could shift, and when it did, Caesar's own evidence would be his strongest weapon. By the time the project reached its halfway point, after months of cold mornings and late nights, the downtown development stood as a testament to Caesar's vision. Crisp lines, precise measurements, and materials sourced for quality rather than just cost. Voss walked the site with Caesar, inspecting every detail. He tapped a brick, ran a hand along a steel girder, and declared, "This is exactly why I trusted you." Caesar soaked in the praise but filed it away alongside emails, contracts, and photographs on that disk labeled My Safety Net. He felt ready for success or failure, knowing that competence had guided every step, and that if betrayal came from within Donnelly Construction, he would not be blindsided. As spring turned to summer, whispers of Tommy's meddling swirled through the crew, and more employees began to look to Caesar for leadership rather than the Donnies. Caesar treated each worried foreman with respect, listened to their concerns, and reminded them gently that a strong company stood on the excellence of its work, not on birthrights or buzzwords. And behind these gestures of loyalty, he fortified his own foundation, solid, unbreakable, and ready for the day when hidden truths would reshape everything. In that single-breath moment as the sun set over the concrete floors of the nearly finished building, Caesar felt the weight of 12 years of labor crystallize into one immutable fact. He was the architect not just of structures, but of his own destiny, backed by the secret power he had laid in waiting. That winter morning felt colder than usual when Caesar arrived early at the Donnelly construction lot, the rising sun barely cutting through the frost on his windshield as he stepped out in his hard hat and heavy jacket, expecting another day of steady progress on the downtown mixed-use project he had secured and nurtured for months. Instead, he found Tommy Donnie already in Frank's makeshift office, rearranging furniture as if marking territory. And when Caesar knocked and entered, Tommy looked up with a grin that did not reach his eyes and said, "Perfect timing. You can help me implement our new efficiency measures," as though Caesar were nothing more than an aide to execute Tommy's buzzword-laden schemes. Caesar's chest tightened, but he answered evenly. "Which changes are we starting with?" Tommy tapped a spreadsheet on his tablet and announced that he had cut subcontractor rates by 10% and switched to cheaper materials for the facade, despite knowing that those alternatives failed the city's historic district guidelines. And Caesar felt the blood drain from his face as he pictured the stop work orders and re-inspections that would inevitably follow. He reminded Tommy calmly that the original facade materials had been approved by the Preservation Board and that any substitution would require a new variance. But Tommy waved him off, saying, "You're stuck in the old ways. Real clients want lower bids and faster timelines." And with that, Caesar realized the old foundation of trust and shared responsibility had crumbled into sand. He spent the rest of that day supervising the crews in silent tension, watching reliable subcontractors frown and mutter when the orders changed mid-pour. And later that afternoon, Rebecca Chan slipped into his side office with wide eyes to confess that 2 key electricians had just handed in their resignation letters rather than install subpar wiring. Caesar nodded, his mind racing. He thanked Rebecca and told her to reassure Miguel Santos, his foreman, that he appreciated their loyalty. But inside he calculated how many essential staff they could yet lose before the project collapsed. That evening, he received an urgent text from Adrian Voss. "We need to talk. Something's wrong with the schedule." Caesar called Voss immediately and explained that he would personally oversee a detailed recovery plan at first light. But the worry in Voss's voice told him that trust had already been damaged by Tommy's unauthorized changes. The next morning, Caesar found Frank pacing in the warehouse, phone pressed to his ear, as he tried to placate a furious client whose new office park project had been delayed by permit issues caused by incorrect blueprints that only Caesar had caught and corrected, without credit or thanks. Frank's face was drawn and older than Caesar had ever seen it. When Frank hung up, Caesar approached and said softly, "We need to correct these errors, and we need a clear chain of command." And Frank shot back defensively. "Tommy's my son. He has every right to learn the business. as if familial rights trumped safety and quality. And Caesar saw in Frank's stubborn glare the moment when loyalty would no longer save his place in the company. That afternoon, an inspector arrived at the suburban Riverside project to condemn the foundation work because Tommy's cost-saving changes had removed required rebar supports. Caesar met the inspector, presented meticulously documented original plans stamped and signed months earlier, and argued that the revised specs came from an unauthorized source. After reviewing the evidence, the inspector issued a correction order and warned that further violations would trigger fines. Caesar stood in the chill of the rain-damp lot, rain soaking through his sleeves, as Miguel joined him and said, "I can't sign off on this mess. I'm out." Caesar's heart sank when Miguel handed him his 2-week notice, then walked away under the gray sky, leaving Caesar with the knowledge that his best foreman, his friend, would abandon the ship rather than watch it sink. Inside the trailer, Caesar closed the door on the growing chaos and took a long breath. He knew that if he stayed, he would be forced to support decisions that jeopardized every reputation he had spent 12 years building. He remembered the hidden disk in the safety deposit box, filled with every contract, every approval, every email, evidence of his competence and loyalty, now his only leverage against the reckless policies of a privileged novice. He wrote his own resignation letter on the company laptop, each keystroke echoing the betrayal he felt. And when Frank called another impromptu meeting in the warehouse to announce Tommy as the new president and CEO, Caesar stood among his weary crew and handed the envelope to Frank without a word, feeling the warehouse drone fall into a suffocating hush. Frank's eyes widened, his Irish brogue thick with shock. "You can't be serious, Danny," he said, voice trembling with hurt or anger, and Caesar looked back steadily and replied, "I've never been more serious," as he placed the letter on Frank's clipboard and turned away. That evening, Caesar spent hours in the now empty project office, packing his personal belongings, framed photos of milestone completions, Lisa's hand-drawn card from their first site visit together, and a small stack of business cards bearing his name as Vice President of Donnelly Construction, a title he had never formally held. He left behind his safety helmet with the company logo and, untouched, the pile of unopened mail for Mr. Daniel Morrison, a name he had registered secretly weeks earlier in preparation. As he zipped the last box closed, Caesar felt the weight of 12 years of sweat and sacrifice settle into a cold resolve. He would not falter, he would not beg, and he would not return. On his final morning, Caesar walked through the standing foundation, touching each beam as though saying goodbye. He saw Tommy swagger by in a crisp suit, late again for a client call, and Caesar offered a nod filtered through a serene calm. "Best of luck," he said quietly. Tommy smirked and replied, "You'll be back when you realize you need me." But Caesar only smiled and replied, "I built this company. I won't need what you break." As he drove away from the Donnelly construction lot for the last time, Caesar imagined the hidden disk lying in its envelope, now part of a bundle of documents poised to secure a lien against every active Donnelly project the moment the company defaulted on its bonds. He did not revel in thoughts of vengeance, but allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He had preserved the evidence of his years of work, he had protected his network of loyal professionals who would follow him, and he had planted the seeds of a new venture. He did not look back at the rising columns of steel and glass behind him. He focused instead on the horizon, where a fresh sunrise awaited Morrison Construction, a company built on merit, integrity, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest revenge is to build something that outlasts the folly of the privileged. By early autumn, Caesar stood in the foyer of his new office, 2 blocks from the old Donnelly construction yard, sunlight slanting through oversized windows onto a polished concrete floor that bore the name Morrison Construction in simple black letters. He had founded this company just 3 weeks after resigning, fueled by frustration more than hope. Yet somehow every detail had fallen into place. A modest receptionist's desk staffed by Rebecca Chan, who had followed him with little hesitation, a small supply of his own tools in the corner cabinet, and plans for the first project, a tight-knit office building donated to him by Adrian Voss in gratitude and confidence. Caesar had spent the mornings coordinating material deliveries through his old contacts, re-engaging the network of subcontractors who once worked for Donnelly, but left in disgust when Tom's cost-cutting gambles revealed their inexperienced leader. He watched them arrive in clean trucks and well-worn vans, their tools neatly strapped to roofs, and felt pride in knowing they, like him, valued quality over buzzwords. Over the next days, the foundation poured smoothly, inspections sailed through without a hitch, and Caesar walked the site at dawn and dusk, personally checking every beam and bolt. Word traveled fast. Neighbors peeked over fences, local newspapers published photos of the rising concrete frame under the headline, "Ex-Donnelly Executive Builds New Empire on Old Values," and Caesar's phone rang constantly with inquiries about future projects. Clients who had once turned away from a faltering Donnelly now asked for bids from Morrison Construction, trusting Caesar's reputation for delivery, not hype. Yet beneath this success, he carried a secret more powerful than any construction contract. The backup disc he had burned religiously each night into a safety deposit box downtown, filled with every contract, every approval, and every cost breakdown from his 12 years with Donnelly. In his mind, it was never just an insurance policy against hard drive failure. It was evidence of rightful ownership over the company's best work and the trust of its clients. That secret ignited into action the afternoon Morrison's first project won final approval when Caesar received an unexpected letter from the county recorder's office. The document bore the Donnelly construction letterhead and a series of legal filings he did not recall authoring. Liens recorded against every active Donnelly project. Rights to priority payment relegated to Daniel Morrison and Associates. All linked to a joint venture clause he had quietly slipped into the mixed-use downtown development contract months earlier when he first partnered with Adrian Voss. It was a clause so buried in legal verbiage that neither Frank nor the company's lawyers had noticed, yet it granted Morrison Construction a security interest in Donnelly's work if they ever defaulted on payments or bonds. Caesar unfolded the paper and read the terms again, feeling his heart pound. And then he dialed his banker to confirm that Donnelly's bond issues had indeed been called by several financial institutions in the wake of failed inspections and missed deadlines. Within 24 hours, every subcontractor from Donnelly Construction received notices of suspended payments pending resolution of the liens. Subcontractors who had been Caesar's allies just weeks earlier, and chaos erupted in Frank's company. By evening, news broke that Donnelly had filed for Chapter 11 reorganization, its equipment impounded by creditors, its major clients forced to pause work until claims were settled. Caesar watched the headlines on his phone, reading that one of the town's oldest construction firms, long run by the Donnies, was now in freefall. Still, he felt no triumph in the public unraveling, only a calm certainty that justice had been served. He held a small gathering at Morrison's new office the next morning. Inviting Rebecca, Miguel Santos returned after seeing the public filings, several journeymen, and even a few former clients who toasted champagne in plastic cups. "To building on solid ground," Caesar said softly, raising his glass. No one mentioned the liens or the public crisis of Donnelly Construction. And that was the point. The true weapon had been silent, hidden until the moment of activation. The group cheered lightly, and Caesar saw relief in their eyes. Relief at being part of something grounded in competence and integrity rather than entitlement. Over the next weeks, Morrison Construction's backlog swelled to $8 million, fueled by developers eager for a reliable partner who delivered what he promised, without surprises or structural hazards. Caesar oversaw each plan himself, confident that no hidden shortcuts threatened his reputation or the safety of the buildings. Meanwhile, across town, Frank Donnie wandered through his near-empty yard like a man lost in a maze of half-built projects and unpaid labor, the sun he had installed atop the company now powerless to salvage it. Frank tried to call Caesar. Messages left at his old cell number went unanswered. But Caesar's new number, paid for by Morrison, remained silent. In private, Frank appealed to Voss and other developers for mercy, promising to rectify mistakes and reinstall Caesar in a leadership role. But no one trusted a man who had abandoned countless foremen and clients in favor of a nepotistic gamble. Caesar knew of Frank's pleas only through secondhand whispers, and he felt no desire to respond. He believed that the man who preached family loyalty above merit deserved this reckoning. At home, Caesar and Lisa sat on their porch, watching the sun sink behind the new office tower Morrison had just completed, and she turned to him and said, "You did it. You built something better." Caesar nodded, his gaze steady. "We did it," he said, placing his hand on hers, "but I built it on truth." Hidden deep in the safety deposit box now lay every shred of proof of Caesar's years of service, chronicled in time-stamped documents that illustrated a simple fact. He had been the backbone of Donnelly Construction, and when that backbone was betrayed, he had the means to protect himself and everyone who believed in him. The ultimate revenge had not come from public spectacle or ruinous confrontation. It had come from the quiet precision of a clause tucked away in legal fine print and the discipline of preserving one's own work. And as the lights in Morrison Construction's office flicked on at dusk, illuminating architectural plans pinned to the walls, Caesar felt the final weight lift from his shoulders. He had learned that loyalty without respect was just exploitation, and that sometimes the truest revenge is building something that stands tall long after your former employers have collapsed under the weight of their own poor choices. In the stillness of that Ohio night, he slipped a copy of the lien notice into his briefcase, closed the drawer, and stepped outside to breathe the cool air, knowing he had not only delivered the hidden bombshell that dismantled a dynasty, but had also laid the first stone of his own enduring legacy.